I've already spent way too much time wrestling with technology today. I almost didn't make this video, and maybe I still won't, but I'm recording it now just because I feel like I have to after all the time I sunk into getting nothing accomplished. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about Ghostbusters, the movie, the franchise, the memory. And I was inspired in this by having watched recently a review that YouTube channel called Red Letter Media did of the Ghostbusters Afterlife movie. I have not seen Ghostbusters Afterlife. I have no real interest in seeing Ghostbusters Afterlife. I'm not even the biggest Ghostbusters fan. But Red Letter Media has an interesting history of having an insight into the culture and where we are in regards to media and how we express ourselves through movies. Just check out the opening of this video that they did, their review of Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Half in the bag.
The only thing is I was watching, I was like, if he shows up in the movie as a ghost at one point, and they have a touching... This trailer makes the tone feel more sappy than Ghostbusters has ever been. It's doing that wistful thing. If he shows up as a ghost to give his daughter some closure because they were estranged, which is the vibe I get from the trailer, that they didn't know Egon very well, if they do that, then I'm going to barf in my lap.
So, if you aren't familiar with the movie, I guess spoilers from that prediction, that is exactly what happened. How, you might ask, did they know that that's what's going to happen? Well, Red Letter Media are prophets, you see. And you might think, wait, what are you saying? Like they got some divine revelation from God? No. Okay, we're not talking about like Jay from Red Letter Media woke up from a dream in a cold sweat and thought, I have been visited by angels with this message for YouTube. I must tell everybody what is going to happen at the end of Ghostbusters. They're prophets in the sense that they see the pattern of how things are going, right? You can probably do this, right? I can reasonably predict how things are going to go with my kids, how things are going to go with my wife in certain circumstances. You can look at the world around you and say, it looks like things are going to go a certain way, and you can make a pretty good prediction. You have to be clued in, though. You have to have your finger on the pulse. And these guys do in an interesting way. And I thought, in particular, the movie Ghostbusters lined up with so many things that we're dealing with today, and the way that things are being brought back. I was thinking about this yesterday. You know, Ghostbusters is a movie that it was made and takes place in the 80s. And in the 80s, I think there's a way in which we were at the height of materialism in the common sense of the word, because we had absolutely maximized our ability to get stuff. Stuff was everywhere, and stuff was the thing to get. The 90s, I think, saw a little bit of a decrease of just the maximalization of stuff, because the 90s saw the introduction of the information age. I know there's not like a hard line, there was computers back in the 80s and stuff, but the 90s really started to ramp up this immaterial sense that, we can prosper through this invisible world of information. And that wasn't so dominant in the 80s. And so you have this world where you're stuck in the stuff. The stuff is surrounding you. The consumerism and the materialism is completely filled up with plastic crap. Movies like Jingle All the Way are kind of a sort of a last gasp of that kind of thing. You still get the fad toy, but from my perspective as a parent, it's way, way less excessive than it was in the early 90s and the whole 80s, where you had these toys that just were like, you had to have them or you were not a cool kid. And like all the other kids who, their parents were scrambling around trying to find this stuff. And so in the midst of this comes this movie about these guys who are trying to start a business. And their business is about the leftover things. It's not even things, right? You have a world that's consumed with the items, right? The material that you can have, but you can't get rid of the ghosts. It's such a fascinating look into the struggle that we were having at the time, and we still are. And I'm gonna be talking about this movie in sort of a more serious tone, and the way that we're interacting with this movie now. I understand that this is a comedy, and that the people who were making it were not necessarily thinking of themselves as preachers of the sort of materialistic apocalypse and look at what we need to do. But I think it resonates, because whether they intended it or not, they put all this stuff in it that worked. That's why movies stick with us. Not necessarily why they succeed, right? Sometimes movies will succeed and have a big budget, and people will really go, a bunch of people to see them, but then they sort of fade away. I really feel like, and they talk about this in the video in a little bit, the Disney Star Wars stuff, the movies that came out, are kind of in that camp where, yeah, listen, they made so much money. And that does make an impact on how people perceive things in the culture and what other movies are going to get made. However, they're not going to stick like the original Star Wars movies stuck. To a certain degree, even the prequels don't stick like the original Star Wars movies stuck. They do, in that their stories continue to be important in the larger Star Wars universe, and we have imbued that with a kind of special significance, and partly because of, Disney wants to make money, but also I think that there's a yearning in the culture for the feeling, the meaning that they found in Star Wars, and so they keep trying to go back and find that meaning again. And even when it doesn't work, it still bubbles up, and they keep trying again. The Mandalorian is the current crop of that harvest, right? That they're trying so much to be like, all right, how do we weave all this stuff together? How do we make the old stuff fresh again? Keep the pieces of the things that didn't work and bring them into new life again, and maybe that'll work, right? It's entirely possible that the Mandalorian will resurrect and sort of redeem the pieces of the Star Wars stuff that didn't work, like in the prequels. Take all the stuff that didn't work and kind of filter it out, but then bring in the pieces that are salvageable. But we're living in this moment of trying to get back to these touchstones, arguably spiritual. I know that's going to be a tough word to swallow for somebody who's just wanting to talk about Ghostbusters and Star Wars, although I don't think it's entirely unwarranted, and let me show you why. See this right here? I can't point. I'm mirrored. Anyway, this right here is a book about religion and Star Wars. This is the gospel of Star Wars, right? You want to fix the world, right? You need you need some force outside yourself. Well, what about the Force? I saw this tweeted out in sort of a disparaging way, and I understand why you would want to disparage this idea of building a religion around the Force, but I think it's important to understand why this is happening and how this is ultimately inevitable in the world that we live in. Let's go back to the video here for a second, and I've got a few more things to loop in, and we'll talk a little bit more about Star Wars and remembering and meaning and ultimately maybe religion.
Ghostbusters Afterlife is the latest entry in our continuing collective pop culture equivalent of the Chris Farley Show.
You remember in Something Wild when Melanie Griffith had you handcuffed to the bed? Remember that? Yeah. Remember when you were with the Beatles?
Remember Chris Farley? Do you remember the Ghostbusters? You love Ghostbusters, but more importantly, you love the idea of loving Ghostbusters. Remember Twinkies? Remember the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? Remember the Nestle's Crunch Bar that Bill Murray handed Harold Ramis in a throwaway improvised gag? Remember Who You Gonna Call? Remember Gozer? Remember the Fireman's Pole?
Hey, does this pole still work?
Remember the Terror Dogs? Remember the Terror Dog statues? Remember the Terror Dog's arms ripping through a chair? Remember Ivo Shandor? Remember the stacked books?
You're right, no human being would stack books like this.
Remember Spores, Mold, and Fungus? Remember Revelation 6:12?
I remember Revelation 7:12.
I think they make their point very well. But here's what I want to point out. Memory is, in some sense, an act of veneration. Or to use an even more... Well, let's use a less inflammatory term. Memory is an act of celebration. Right? So, for instance, as I was thinking about this the other day, I was thinking about the day that my... Well, not the day, but the time when my grandmother had passed away, and we all went up to be together with the family for her funeral. And what we did as a family was we brought together our memories, right? We brought together these, not even specific, like, I mean, there were specific anecdotes that people mentioned and said, oh, remember this, but it wasn't just like, let us have now a list of things that happened with Grandma, but it was a sense that all of us came together and we elevated the spirit of our grandmother among us, or mother, whatever relationship she was my grandmother. We all turned our focus towards her, and we celebrated her life and what she had been. And what is happening in that is kind of like an act of worship. I know that word has a super loaded meaning, and there's a lot of stuff that's loaded with meaning that I think maybe people who are interested in Ghostbusters, and particularly viewers of Red Letter Media, might not care for. But it's difficult to look at how these things play out and not see them as acts of worship, right? These sort of pseudo-religious experiences that are springing up for people around the things that were important to them as children. But as the Red Letter Media guys are so right to point out, the problem is that you can't get deep enough with this stuff. Celebrating to this extent a movie, not even the movie but the stuff from the movie, is ultimately an empty exercise. And they're, by the way, speaking of Red Letter Media, they are great at pointing this stuff out, that the idea of like all of this stuff that we had back then, all these little plastic toys, are somehow important. That is an important part of our lives is just ludicrous. So check this out. This is a good example of the, let's say, the red letter media crusade against the idolatry of stuff.
Be destroying as many vintage.
I can't make my technology work. Stay over here.
Star Wars figures from destroying as many vintage Star Wars figures from the original trilogy as possible. I will not stop until every last action figure is wiped off the face of the earth. Doing this, and the conclusion of the Skywalker trilogy, will hopefully bring me some closure. At least that's what my therapist says. So today I'll be destroying 2,387 vintage Star Wars figures in a 55-gallon tank filled with an illegal amount of acetone. As these figures dissolve...
Alright, we're gonna skip forward here a little bit. So, you can see there the rebellion, the proper rebellion against our veneration of stuff. And you know that that video had to have made somebody very angry. Look at all those vintage toys. They were so important to my childhood, and he's just taking them and melting them down. And I'm reminded of, this is going to be a very weird connection for some of y'all, but there's a verse in Habakkuk that talks about the person who says to the stone, you know, the speechless stone, awake, and to the wood, arise, it shall speak, right? And this is essentially the same message. Mike Stoklas is like, your plastic is dead. Stop worshiping it. It's not worth it. But the problem is we're kind of stuck, right? I worked briefly at a prison. This is going to seem like a non sequitur, but I'll tie it in. I worked briefly at a prison, and while I was there, I heard a story about some cell extractions that were not safely done. Alright, so the cell extraction is when you have these guys who are locked in a box, right? One or two, sometimes one, sometimes two. They're stuck in a box, and you generally don't want them to come out. But sometimes you do want them to come out, and they don't want to come out. And when those times happen, especially if there's potentially a weapon in the cell, you've got some people who will go in and deal with this individual. They've got shields, they've got like all this padding and stuff, and they run in there and jump on top of the guy and, you know, tie him up. Well, they don't tie him up, but they, you know, handcuff him, and he gets carried out of there. And there was an incident in which a prisoner had managed to take 2 pieces of plastic from his light that he had in his cell, fashion decent sized blades from this plastic, 2 of them, taped them to his hands, and was in his cell on top of his bunk with these blades in his hands, screaming for people to come in and get him. And while they didn't necessarily have to rush in right that second, there was certainly opportunity to, for instance, turn off his water and just hang out for a while and wait for him to get bored. There were people in that prison who volunteered to go into this cell and extract this gentleman at risk of their life. Now, when I was told this story, I was told it essentially as I just told it to you. That, hey, look at these people. They're being idiots for no reason. And I went into this job and thinking like, well, why would they do that? Like, this seems like a bad idea. And after I'd worked there for a couple of months, one of the other guards at the prison said to me, you know, there's a lot of Odinists who work at this prison. And I was like, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, like they worship Odin and Thor, you know, like the Norse gods. Now, I think that the more common term would have been Norse pagan, but these guys were calling themselves Odinists, or he was calling them Odinists anyway. That's the name he had gotten from them. And it clicked with me as he described this, that this was what was going on in these stupid, dangerous cell extractions. These people had embraced this view of Norse religion, and so they were attempting to die in battle. Literally. They looked around for a job where they might potentially die in battle, and then went into that job in relatively dangerous circumstances in the hopes that they would prove themselves worthy for Valhalla by being killed by an idiot in his cell with a knife that they didn't even have to go in to deal with. Now, that's one expression of our yearning for meaning, right? We have it wired into us that we're gonna look around and find something to mean something. It has to be there. Somewhere, there's gotta be something that means something, and we stick it on everything. And what are we sticking it on? One of the things we're sticking it on is our stuff. Show me the stuff. There it is. Right? Like, oh, you're going to say to me, I'm not an Odinist. I don't believe in Odin. That'd be crazy to go and try to get yourself killed so you can go to Valhalla? And yet, we keep venerating things. I gotta say, I have more respect for the Odinist than I have for the person that has 8,000 Star Wars figurines and can't admit that what he's doing is essentially a religious exercise. That's just silly.
Nostalgia, marketing,
Mike,
money.
our generation will not let our toys go. Ever.
Innovation! Proton pack ready, trap set! And with my new Ghost Never, all systems are go.
We're going to insist that our grandchildren keep playing with our toys.
You had to like this because I liked it.
They can't have their own toys. You need to play with Star Wars and Ghostbusters.
Well, that's the thing is watching this movie, right?
Okay, so I'm not dealing so much with their specific review, but again, think about this. Think about where we're at and what we're doing. So, for very good reasons, many of the people in our society have deconstructed out of the system of meaning that they were born into, or at least that the society has traditionally had. All right, you look around at all the weirdo people in your churches and talking about Jesus and stuff, and there's things that you can't reconcile, and to a large extent those people have, it seems, there's a lot of nuance to this, but there is a sense in which, in order to protect themselves and ourselves, I'll add myself into this because I'm a practicing religious person. I do not worship at I just pray to Jesus. I don't need my Force book or whatever. But in order to insulate ourselves from the onslaught of modernity and this coming age of the stuff, and we don't do it perfectly, but sort of trying to survive in that world has led us to create a shell around ourselves which protects us, but also, in a sense, makes it hard for people to get in. There's now the shell that they can't pierce through, and they're looking at it like, what? I don't understand this. This doesn't track. But they're still left with, I need something to give me meaning in my life. I need I need there to be something. The ghosts in Ghostbusters keep coming back. It doesn't matter how much stuff you have or what you build, the ghosts come back. And interestingly enough, I'll mention Mike Stacklasa here famously believes in ghosts. I do not mock him for that. I get it. You have to believe in something. All right? It's so much more. You have to believe in something. And if you're in the modernist materialist frame, you're kind of shut out of believing in the ghosts. You might kind of sort of believe in them, but you can't. You have to say, it's maybe some kind of energy. Or it's I don't know. I would try. I'm trying to think of like a scientific explanation, and that's really even Ghostbusters itself does the science thing with the ghosts. They say, here's our ghosts. They have science-ish stuff behind them. We can still control them in the material world. We have our ghost traps and our proton packs, and like science will ultimately keep these ghosts from destroying us. We have the power to do this. But I gotta tell you, you really don't. The ghosts aren't scientific. I'll briefly relate. I had a conversation with a gentleman who is a religious person, right? But he was trying to convince me that I needed to go to a kinesiologist and a chiropractor to have to deal with some things. I don't want to go into specifics because it doesn't involve me. But like he was saying that the person that we were speaking of needed these services, and I thought, you can't accept. He kept talking about like he did his research on all the science that was behind these things, and also this person uses essential oils, right? He blows smoke up into the air for health, right? And I said to him, what you're doing is you're offering up incense to keep the evil spirits at bay and to, draw the essence of the good spirits. That did not work for him. He could not get to, like, he's doing it. He's doing the practice, but he can't admit, I'm offering up incense. He's going to go to a kinesiologist and an herbalist and a chiropractor, but neither he nor they can look at themselves and say, this is shamanism, really. I'm some kind of a shaman. I'm doing spiritual healing here, and like there is no scientific basis for that, and I need to accept it. So they scrape around and they find something that kind of sort of works, and it does kind of sort of work, and so they're like, I've got my shamanism. I don't have to admit the existence of the spiritual world, and now here I am, and I'm safe. I gotta tell you, the spiritual world is gonna break through. It's gonna get you whether you are ready for it or not. And I wanted to talk about the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, because until I started thinking about this topic, I never realized what a genius thing it was to have that character in Ghostbusters. So here's Mr. Stay Puft. He's a marshmallow man. I'm about to get way too symbolic on this. This might be something that some of y'all would be like, no, can't. Stop analyzing this thing that's just from a comedy. But again, I'm not making the proposition that the things I'm about to say were conscious, forefronted, intentional thoughts in the minds of the writers and the producers of Ghostbusters. But I think that they work because they have depth that the people making them were not consciously aware of. And so think about what this guy is. He's a marshmallow. All right, what is a marshmallow? All right, to start with, it's full of air, right? It's empty. It's vain. It doesn't have any fillingness to it, right? You squish it down and it's just, it doesn't cohere. And then it's also full of sugar, right? Processed, completely unnutritious sugar, things that you can't really take into your body and make a part of yourself. Like the sugar will react with other stuff and make you, retain things and get fat, but it ultimately doesn't become part of your body. It's undigestible, let's say. Not completely undigestible, but unfortunately it's somewhat digestible. But it's this empty, sweet thing that comes from where? Well, it's wearing a sailor's outfit. It comes from the sea. It comes from the place where you can't stand. Right? Where there are things under the water that you can't see. That might be monstrous. It comes from the realm of the sea serpent. I'm not speaking physically here, but I'm saying like in a symbolic, metaphorical sense. This is where the Stay Puft Marshmallows Man land's realm is, and he's on a more like base level. He's a sailor. I think they even reference this in the movie when the sailor comes to town. What does he bring with him? He brings with him a sort of chaotic need for satisfaction, right? He's going to get drunk. He's going to solicit prostitutes. He's going to break things. This is the spirit of the sailor. And where else is he from? Well, he's a marshmallow. Now, the modern marshmallow is made from sugar and stuff, and it's all synthetic. However, the original marshmallow came from a marsh. It came from the place where the water and the earth were indefinitely mixed together, where the chaos of the amphibian, let's say, the thing that was both in the water and out of the water at the same time and wasn't definite, that thing was birthed. And all of that stuff is in this silly, giant, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. This is the demon of modernity. This is what that original movie was telling you. It was saying, look, here is this thing that is going to take us over if we don't do something. What do we have to do? Well, you have to gather the four corners, right? You got your four guys with their 4 proton packs, and they have to unite themselves together in love and in potential self-sacrifice. This is what uniting the streams is. This is what happens at the end of Ghostbusters, is the 4 corners of the earth, right? All of the things that were far apart come together, not in tyranny, not because someone forced them to, but in, well, it's going to sound sappy to say love, but I'm going to say love anyway. That these 4 things come together in love and unite together, and that is what destroys the monster of modernity. And it's a risk, right? Loving the person next to you is a risk. Crossing the streams is a risk. Trusting someone is a risk because they can betray you. But it's the only way. Being trustworthy and trusting others is the only way that this giant, fluffy, empty, sugary, white sea monster can be defeated. That's what Ghostbusters is about. That's why you feel something when you watch it. That's why it worked for you. All right? It's It's stuff from the Bible, okay? The monster from the sea that comes up and ultimately is destroyed by the joining together of love in Christ. And the 4 horsemen and the 4 gospels and the 4 beasts, they all have to work together. They all have to go in their direction and do their thing and be under the banner of love. I don't know if this worked for anybody, but I had it all in my head. I don't know if I got it out properly, but that's what I wanted to say. That's what watching this review and a lot of other stuff that Red Letter Media has done as well really inspired in me, was to think about how trapped we've become and how fragmented we are in looking for meaning. We're looking for meaning in Star Wars. We're looking for meaning in remembering our childhood and the Ghostbusters things, and like the cycle is ramping up. It gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and we keep having to go back to remember the Mandalorian, remember Baby Yoda. Like we need more Baby Yoda. We gotta, like, the memories are running out. You have to remember something deeper. You know, the actual religions of the world understand this. That's why the Passover is about memory, not of that cool movie I saw, but about a cosmic level of deliverance from an ancient evil that, within the framework of that, actually happened. And that's why Christ says, when he gives the instructions for the Lord's Supper, do this in remembrance of me. Because remembrance is ultimately an act of celebration and worship. And it is okay, in some sense, to celebrate lower things. But they need to be in connection, in concert, in hierarchy with the higher things. The ultimate good things. The things that make things good in themselves. We need to remember that. Thanks for your time and attention. Hope this wasn't too weird. I'll see you next time with something else.